Seeing your favorite musician or band at a live concert can be a pretty powerful experience. I mean, think about it. Maybe you grew up listening to a certain band or singer on the radio, but seeing them in the flesh and being able to interact with them in some small way, well, it's a totally different experience. I'm sure 20-year-old Morgan Harrington felt the same way, and she was waiting for October 17th of 2009 to come quickly. Her favorite band, Metallica, was performing live at the John Paul Jones Arena at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And Morgan couldn't have been more excited. But on that fateful day, not only did Morgan have to miss the concert she'd been waiting months for, but she would go missing. Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. It's totally free, and it just keeps you up to date with all of my latest videos. Morgan Harrington was born on July 24th, 1989 in Charlottesville, Virginia, to parents Dan and Gil Harrington. She had a brother named Alex and was all around your average young girl, or woman at the time that this case took place. Morgan was also defined by her family as a bit of a homebody. She preferred to stay at home if she could, and even though she had her close group of friends, she wasn't exactly the type to go out every single night. Morgan's mother described her with 4 simple words: shining, loving, beautiful, and original. Morgan, among other things, was an advocate for children's rights and wanted to do something that would change the world for the better. Knowing this, Morgan chose her college major very carefully. She was very passionate about teaching, and she wanted to work with and for children. After graduating high school early, Morgan enrolled in Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia. But even though she was in university, she maintained constant contact with her parents, visiting them all the time when she had the spare time on her hands. So all in all, Morgan was very close to making her dreams a reality, and she was looking forward to what life had to offer. Virginia Tech was perfect for Morgan because she would get to work towards a noble cause, educating younger generations. When she wasn't busy with her studies, Morgan also loved music and live concerts, and her favorite band was Metallica. In fact, if you saw Morgan's room, the walls were covered with Metallica posters. Now, I'll be honest, as an outsider looking in, Morgan is about the last person I'd expect to be a Metallica fan. But, hey, good on her. They're a great band. Morgan's family and friends, though, defined her as the world's best hugger. Some people aren't very touchy-feely, but Morgan certainly was. She wasn't one for a casual handshake or a nod. She wanted more. Morgan was also very close with her parents and brother, and if there's one thing that Morgan's family doesn't regret about her passing, it's the fact that they never took any moment for granted. Morgan and her family were always there for each other. They always made sure to say, "I love you," before going anywhere, and time to them was just very precious, and they made every second count with Morgan. In fact, the family had a very special code of saying, "I love you." Morgan and her mother would sign 241 to each other as they pulled out of the driveway each day, which means "I love you too much, forever and once more." The little things like this, those are the things that tend to stick with you forever. And in this case, these little gestures certainly stuck with Gil, because 241 would be the last thing that Morgan ever signed to her mother before she disappeared, never to be seen again. October 17th of 2009 was the day Morgan had been waiting for. It was the day when Metallica was having their huge concert at the John Paul Jones Arena at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Now, Metallica was to Morgan as Taylor Swift is to Swifties, and she was bouncing off the walls with excitement, trying to contain herself. If that wasn't enough, Morgan had stuck the tickets to the concert on her refrigerator months in advance and kept waiting for the day to come when she would finally see her favorite band live. It was a reminder whenever she walked by her kitchen, and seeing those tickets put a smile on Morgan's face every time she passed by. Finally, the day of the concert came. Morgan and 3 of her close friends drove to the arena and were waiting for the concert to start. During the opening act's performance, Morgan went in search of a bathroom, and that search eventually led her to outside of the arena. Now, this was weird because the arena had 18 female restrooms for the attendees, so it's unclear why Morgan left the arena. It's possible she just passed by the restrooms without seeing them and ended up outside the venue by sheer accident, but Truthfully, we just don't know. Anyway, Morgan made her way back to the arena, but she wasn't let in. See, there was a strict no re-entry policy enforced at the time in the arena, and even though Morgan had the ticket, she couldn't persuade security to let her back in. She was obviously bummed that she missed out on witnessing her favorite band perform live, but Morgan decided to leave the arena altogether and just figure out a way to get back home. Meanwhile, when Morgan's friends noticed that she hadn't returned, they called her at around 8:48 p.m., and this was when they found out that Morgan had been locked out. Morgan told her friends that she would just go home and there was nothing to worry about. She knew Charlottesville like the back of her hand, so it wasn't like Morgan was anywhere unknown or didn't know her way back home. She just didn't have a car or money to make the journey easier, as most of her belongings, save for her phone and purse, were with her friends inside of the arena. But sadly, this would be the last time Morgan would ever talk to anyone. After this phone call with friends, she was just gone. The next day, on October 18th, Morgan was supposed to visit her parents. See, Morgan needed her dad's help with some math problems, and she was also due to visit her parents for their weekly meetup. So this visit was a 2-for-1 for Morgan. But when her parents called and texted her asking when she was going to get there was no response from Morgan. The calls all went unanswered and messages were all left unread. When Gil and Dan called Morgan's friends, who were with her at the arena that night, they were horrified to learn that Morgan had been separated. Morgan's parents were dreading that maybe Morgan was in trouble. She didn't have cash on her or a car, so was she somewhere unsafe? Was she in trouble? Well, Morgan's parents were battling question after question in their heads. The police were immediately involved, and 20-year-old Morgan was reported missing. The detectives asked around the place where Morgan was last seen, and some witnesses reported seeing Morgan at around 9:30 p.m. hitchhiking on a nearby bridge. Another group of witnesses saw Morgan with 3 men shortly after she left the arena. A passerby also discovered a discarded shirt covered in red stains near the arena where Morgan was last seen. And needless to say, this was not good news. Police were able to locate this shirt and they took it in as evidence. All of this left the police stunned. Could these 3 men be responsible for Morgan's radio silence and absence? Did this shirt belong to Morgan? And most importantly, what was going on? Well, as the detectives are trying to piece everything together, someone made a discovery. A person spotted something in the RV lot at UVA's Lanigan Athletic Field. It was a discarded purse. It contained ID and a phone with the batteries removed. Within minutes, police were called and they were able to link the belongings to 20-year-old Morgan Harrington. When Dan and Gil were informed of this finding, their hearts sank. Morgan was supposed to come to their house for a couple of days, but now she was nowhere to be found. Their minds were going to a very dark place, and with each passing day, it was getting harder and harder to pull themselves out of this vortex of dark thoughts. As much as I want to say that the investigation sped up after Morgan's purse was discovered, that tragically was not the case. There were just no leads. Even though the detectives were working hard to find Morgan, time was just passing by. Just like that, 3 months had gone by, and there was still no sign of Morgan, and everyone was losing hope of finding Morgan unharmed and alive. That thought soon turned into a scary reality when on January 26th of 2010, a farmer made a harrowing discovery. Human remains were found on the vast grounds of the 742-acre Anchorage farm, about 10 miles away from the John Paul Jones Arena. When the police were called, the remains were taken in for identification using DNA. Now, sadly, it had been months and the remains were in terrible condition, but they were unfortunately described as being 20-year-old Morgan Harrington. The detectives didn't officially release the details of Morgan's passing, but her mom, Gil, was able to confirm that the attack on her had been brutal, and sadly, she was taken advantage of, which is just terrible to think about how an exciting night out went so incredibly wrong so quickly. By April of 2010, forensic tests were conducted on the red-stained shirt that was found back in 2009, where Morgan was last seen. The shirt sadly belonged to Morgan, and from the looks of it, you can see that the attack on Morgan was very gruesome and disturbing. The investigators were at a loss. They were sure Morgan's killer was someone familiar with the area. See, the land where Morgan's body was found was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and no one ever visited this area. But an outsider couldn't have known that. It had to be someone from Charlottesville because they knew that this place was perfect for dumping a body without being seen. Luckily, the police had somewhat of a lead, and it was seen in the form of DNA. See, DNA evidence was able to link Morgan's crime with another abduction and violent assault in Fairfax. This case took place in 2005. A woman who wished to remain anonymous and is known by the alias of RG was attacked and violently taken advantage of on September 24th of 2005 when she was going home after a grocery store run at around 8:30 p.m. The attack was so violent that RG lost consciousness. The man was literally on the brink of ending RG's life. Luckily, the assailant ran away when he saw headlights in the distance. The man from the car took RG to the hospital where a DNA test was conducted, but it didn't match any criminals in the database at that time. RG was left traumatized after this ordeal, so much so that she had to go back to her hometown to spend some time healing mentally, emotionally, and physically, if that's something you ever truly heal from. So the investigators were certain that the perpetrator was the same man. With the DNA, a composite sketch was made and they turned to the public for any information on this mysterious and obviously violent man. Amid the investigation and the search for the killer, Crime Stoppers announced a $100,000 reward for any information on the killer and his whereabouts. In light of this, Metallica also came forward and bumped that reward up to $150,000 and even made a public appeal via a video message. The detectives, as well as the local community, were doing everything they could to try to find the perpetrator behind RG's attack and Morgan's brutal murder. But sadly, this is where things went from bad to worse. After 5 long years, the killer had still not been found, but worse yet, he was about to strike again. It was September of 2014, almost 5 years into Morgan's disappearance and untimely passing. The investigators were feeling helpless at this point. Morgan had tragically lost her life. RG was left emotionally scarred and shattered by a monumental incident, and now the killer was back at it again, and this time he targeted another student. Her name was Hannah Graham, and she was an 18-year-old British-born student at the University of Virginia. September 14th of 2014 was the fateful day when Hannah went missing. She was seen at the downtown mall in Charlottesville in the morning, and later that evening, she went to be with her friends to attend several parties. It was at the second party of the night when Hannah called it a night and left to go home. Now, Hannah was very inebriated, and it was a little after 1 a.m., and Hannah's friend received a text from her saying that she was lost and trying to find her way back home. This was tragically the last communication Hannah had with anyone. Now, I just want to interject here and say one thing. I'm so sick of nearly every case I cover involving someone leaving a party or a bar alone at night. This is such a simple issue to resolve. Don't let your friends wander off into danger. I don't care if you have to take their keys, physically restrain them, or what. Do not ever let your friends wander off into the unknown if they're inebriated in any way, and certainly don't let them do it alone, even if they're sober for that matter. Situations like this are so easily avoidable if people would just look out for one another. But anyway, the next day, Hannah didn't show up to meet with her friends, and this immediately worried them. After contacting Hannah's parents, 18-year-old Hannah Graham was reported missing on September 15th of 2014. The police checked CCTV footage this time, and luckily they were able to trace Hannah's last steps and where she was before she disappeared. After midnight, Hannah was seen walking alone at various locations, once by a pub, then across from a local gas station, and finally at a pizza place at 1:06 a.m. But this is where the investigators noticed something very eerie. Hannah was being followed. The man was a good distance behind her, but it was clear to anyone that he was following Hannah everywhere she went. Originally, the mysterious man was across the way on the other side of the street, but once he saw Hannah, he made a beeline for her. When the detectives asked around, witnesses came forward and said that the man had a very strange aura about him. He didn't look friendly at all. At one point, he approached Hannah and guided her to a bar where they spent some time. And infuriatingly, the man offered Hannah even more drinks when she clearly didn't need any. Another witness spotted Hannah and the same man by an orange car, a 1998 Chrysler Sebring. And he clearly heard Hannah shouting, "I'm not getting in that car with you." The investigators knew that this mysterious man may be the key to solving not only Hannah's case, but also Morgan's and possibly RG's. The similarities were just too obvious. The disappearances took place in the same area, and the man targeted college students, young women to be exact. And so the search for this man was on. 5 weeks later, though, while the police were tracking down the murderer, Hannah's family would go through a similar tragedy as the Harringtons, when Hannah's remains were discovered. On October 18th of 2014, searchers from the Chesterfield County Sheriff's Office recovered human remains at an abandoned property. The remains were positively identified as those of 18-year-old Hannah Graham. Initially, the official cause of death was not released by the investigators, but on November 18th of 2014, Hannah's cause of death was simply listed as undetermined. But according to the evidence that investigators were able to gather, the manner of her death looked strikingly similar to that of Morgan Harrington. As tragic as Hannah's passing was, it brought the investigators closer to the man behind this vast terror spree. Eventually, the police were able to identify the man in the CCTV footage who was seen following Hannah. This was 32-year-old Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. He was a nursing assistant and a taxi driver in Charlottesville, Virginia. Jesse had a very rough upbringing. As a kid, Jesse was taken advantage of, which is very awful, but instead of Jesse learning to heal from this trauma, he gathered his emotional scars, buried them deep, and with time, he turned violent, dark, and very resentful towards women. As he grew older, he first attended the evangelical Christian Liberty University in Lynchburg, and then he enrolled in the Christopher Newport University in Newport News. The reason for this change was because he was a suspect in violent attacks against women at both universities, causing him to eventually leave CNU football team in September of 2003. Fast forward to 2007. Jesse obtained a DMV permit and worked as a taxi driver in the Charlottesville area. And during the time of Jesse leaving college and getting the driving permit, it's believed that he violently attacked RG. Afterward, in October of 2009, when Morgan went missing, the investigators believed that she'd crossed paths with Jesse, and he decided to take advantage of this young defenseless woman under the pretense of just giving her a ride home. Fast forward to September of 2014. The detectives believed that the same thing happened with Hannah, but it seems most likely that he forced Hannah to enter his car somehow, as she was obviously heard refusing to get in with him. All of this led the investigators to obtain a search warrant for the man's home and car. The police were able to find Hannah's fingerprints on the passenger side door of the car. Moreover, in the apartment, the investigators obtained a phone with the SIM card still in it, as well as a pair of shorts with Jesse and Hannah's DNA on it. The detectives officially named Jesse as a suspect in Hannah's disappearance on September 24th of 2014. The investigators also figured out where Jesse was at the time of Hannah's disappearance. He was seen on CCTV footage going from bar to bar, getting hammered and acting very inappropriately and aggressively in front of women. Eventually, Jesse visited the police headquarters and asked the officers to let him speak with a lawyer in regards to Hannah's case. As he was leaving, though, he was charged for speeding, and that was originally how they got the warrant for his arrest. But Jesse had other plans. He emptied out his bank account almost immediately after this incident, and he was on the run. Luckily, 2 days later, on September 24th of 2014, the investigators managed to find him in Galveston, Texas, where he was camping out on Gilchrist Beach. He was arrested right then and there. Finally, all of the pieces started to fall into place. DNA from Morgan's remains matched that found on RG and Hannah's shorts recovered from Jesse's apartment. All of the matches pinned Jesse for all three crimes. Jesse was finally going to face the consequences for his dark and deadly actions, and on September 15th of 2015, Jesse was formally charged with first-degree murder and abduction in the murder of Morgan Harrington. His trial date was set for October 24th of 2017. But before this could take place, on March 2nd of 2016, Jesse pleaded guilty to all of the charges, including the murder charges of Hannah and the assault and attempted murder charges on RG in 2005. Jesse's guilty plea was part of an agreement. Basically, if Jesse pleaded guilty to all of the charges and gave up his right to appeal this decision later on, then the death penalty would be off the table. Eventually, Jesse Matthews was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the chance of parole in the cases of Morgan and Hannah. As for RG's attack and attempted murder, Jesse was given 3 additional life sentences. Jesse would spend his entire life in jail, and he'll never see the light of day. As of recently, in May of 2019, several news outlets reported that Jesse Matthews was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. After notifying the victims' families, Jesse was transferred from the Red Onion State Prison to Sussex State Prison for treatment. He is still alive as of present, and even though no one should ever wish something like this on anyone, I guess for a demented man like Jesse who thinks it's his right to terrorize women, maybe an exception can be made. I mean, I just don't feel bad for this guy. Morgan's mom, Gil, responded in a way that was much more compassionate when she found out about Jesse's diagnosis. She went on to say, whatever justice is, perhaps this is the next phase of his justice. Perhaps this is his karma. It's just so terrifying to think that Jesse Matthews had a decade-long history of abuse and violent attacks against women. And mind you, these are just the attacks that we know of. There are several missing person and cold cases that occurred in Virginia that could very well also be linked to Jesse. But because there's no DNA evidence or undeniable proof, we'll sadly never know. I don't know what's scarier, knowing how many people Jesse has targeted, or knowing that there must be so many victims of this vile monster out there who haven't been given justice. Following the tragedies that struck the Harrington and Graham families, their loved ones grew even closer, and they were there for each other as the search for Jesse was on. It's such a weirdly comforting feeling, knowing that there are people beside you who've gone through the same hurt, but they're there trying to get you through that same pain. Both Morgan and Hannah were helpless and defenseless, and when a monster with an unexplainable vendetta against women set his eyes on them, sadly, two unsuspecting and innocent women were driven straight into the hands of death. As sad as Hannah's passing was, it was the fuel that led to Jesse's downfall and arrest. In light of this terrible event, an organization called Help Save the Next Girl was formed by Gil and Dan Harrington. It's an honorary nonprofit organization made not only to remember Morgan and all that she was, but also to nurture anyone who wants to protect themselves against evil, foster healthy relationships between people, and provide outreach support to victims' families going through similar tragedies. The Morgan Dana Harrington Memorial Scholarship at Virginia Tech was also created to award students for their good grades and college interest. Additionally, Morgan's legacy of helping children in need and raising awareness on children's issues was brought to life with the Orphan Medical Network International, or OMNI, an organization that provides medical care to children and anyone else in need in Africa. As for Hannah's legacy, the Hannah E. Graham Memorial Scholarship was created in 2021 to show Hannah's dedication and participation in softball leagues around Northern Virginia. We can only hope that Morgan and Hannah's families have been able to find a way to move on with their lives after their incomprehensible losses. Because while Morgan, RG, and Hannah's pain may be over, their families are the ones left to live with this hurt for the rest of their lives. It sickens me that this man, while incarcerated, gets to carry on with his life. But for these families, it's just not that easy. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Abby Lopez and Carl2112. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. And you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.